outline page that you got last week or the week before. I guess it was just last week, because the week before I don't think I had it ready. So if you need one, I've got them up here, but you may already have it. And the one I have up here doesn't have any blanks. It's all the words filled in for you. So there. Yeah. We started talking about chapter 18, and I called this "The Hour Has Come" because several times Jesus said, my time or my hour has not yet come, but now it has. It's time. This is right before his crucifixion. We talked about his arrest. That was point number one, his arrest. And when he was in the garden, and then Judas shows up with the soldiers. Could have been as many as 600 of them, which just amazes me. And then the trials. And the first trial was before Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas. Caiaphas was the actual high priest, but most people believe that Annas was the one that was kind of the power behind the scene. And this chapter, it goes back and forth between Jesus and the trials and Peter and his denials. And so we had the first trial is before Annas, and then goes to Peter's, the part B was Peter's first denial, and then it goes back to Annas and continued there, and then back to Peter for his second and third denial. And then John doesn't mention it, other than it says that Annas sent Jesus to Caiaphas. But in Matthew, we heard that we read about how he was before Caiaphas, the high priest in title, and went before him. And he was the one that, and I remind you that he is speaking for God. That's his job as high priest. And though I don't think he realized it, but some of the things that he has said, they were coming from God, and yet he didn't understand it. He didn't. One of the things he said was, it's better for one person to die for the whole world than for a bunch of people to die, and that's exactly what God did. Jesus died for all of us. And then the other was, I told you, when he commands him in the name of God to tell the truth, and Jesus did tell the truth, but he didn't believe him. And you would think that if he knows that he's the one that's supposed to be speaking for God, and if he tells somebody to tell the truth, that they should tell the truth, and if he believed that Jesus was telling the truth, he should have believed Jesus. But he didn't. And so then he sent him to Pilate, and that's where we're at, is going before Pilate, which I have as letter F. Yeah, okay. So the first thing it talks about is not Jesus before Pilate, but the Pilate and the Jewish leaders. Verse 28, it says, "By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, the Jews did not enter the palace. They wanted to be able to eat Passover." That's just kind of, I don't know exactly how to describe it. They were more worried about being able to eat Passover than they were about sentencing an innocent man to prison or to death, and more worried about being, quote, quote, cleansed so they could, or clean so they could take part in Passover, than they were worried about all of the illegal trials and things that they were doing right there at that time. And so they took him to Pilate, and instead of going inside the palace and meeting there, Pilate came out and met them out on I forgot what it's called. I think it's got it in here, the Praetorium. So in verse 29 it says, "So Pilate came out to them and asked, 'What charges are you bringing against this man?' If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." And Pilate said, "Well, take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." "But we have no right to execute anyone," the Jews objected. And this happened so that the words that Jesus had spoken, indicating the kind of death he was going to die, would be fulfilled. So they had made up their minds, back in verse 66, that Jesus should die. And but they did not have the authority to put anyone to death because they were still under Roman law. Romans were the ones that were in charge, and so they had to, in order for that to happen, they had to get the Roman soldiers, the Roman governor, to pronounce sentence on him. And so they took him there. Let me see. And Pilate's main responsibility really was to keep order and to make sure that the Caesar got the emperor got his taxes. That was basically his thing. Keep order, make sure the taxes for Rome were collected. And I'm sure he had to deal a lot with like the Sanhedrin and especially the Sadducees because they were fairly wealthy and very powerful. And I'm sure that he had a lot of that going on. But at that time in Jerusalem, there were a lot of groups too. There were the Zealots and the Essenes that were very, radical, caused a lot of problems. And during the Feast of Passover, which is getting ready to start, Jerusalem was packed. I mean, there would be, I don't know how many people, lots of people would come. Every Jewish man that lived within a certain distance of Jerusalem was required to come to Jerusalem for the Passover. And people opened up their homes, and there would be just probably 5, 6, 10 times more people in Jerusalem than normal. And it was a very explosive time. And so he was, I'm sure, on edge the whole time, worried about what was going to happen. And that the Jews come to him and said, this guy should be killed. And he tried his best. And we'll get to that in just a moment, not to try to make a decision himself, wanting to put it off on them. But in verse 33, this is Jesus with Pilate. It says, Pilate then went back inside the palace, and he summoned Jesus, and he asked him, are you king of the Jews? And Jesus says, is that your own idea, or did others talk to you about me? And he said, am I a Jew? He replied, it was your people and your chief priests who handed you over to me. The first question he asked is, are you king of the Jews? I'm sure he is very concerned about Jesus being a political leader and trying to start a rebellion. And he's wanting to make sure that, if he's a threat of Rome, that we take care of this right now. And Jesus, as he typically does, he doesn't answer the question, does he? He answers it with another question. He said, Did you get this on your own, or did other people talk to you about me? And it was just, that's just typical Jesus. He didn't necessarily answer a lot of questions that were asked him, and we'll get to even more of that a little bit later. And then he said, "What is it that you have done?" Pilate's trying to figure out why the Pharisees and Sadducees were wanting him killed. What was it? What had he done that was so bad? If he was wanting to start a rebellion, he could understand that. But exactly why they were mad. And Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jews. But now my kingdom is from another place." And he's like, "Okay, what is it you've done? He's still worried about the rebellion. Jesus said, "But my kingdom is not of this world." And if it were part of this world, then he wouldn't have stopped Peter from attacking the soldiers, right? We talked about that last week. That Peter took the sword and he whacked off the guy's ear, and he wouldn't have done that. He would have allowed it. He would have, called the angels in and called everybody, if that's what he was doing. But he wasn't there for that reason. His kingdom was not of this world. And then Pilate, in verse 37, it says, "You are a king then," said Pilate. And Jesus answered, "You are right in saying that I am a king. In fact, for this reason I was born, and for this I came into this world, to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." "What is truth?" Pilate asked. And with this he went out again to the Jews and said, "I find no basis for a charge against him." Should have stopped right there, but he didn't. "But it's your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at a time at the time of Passover. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews?" And they shouted back, "No, not him. Give us Barabbas." And now Barabbas had taken part in a rebellion. Jesus said, "I am a king. That's the reason I was born. That's the reason I came to earth. Not to rule on earth, but to set up his heavenly kingdom, and eventually will be an earthly kingdom." But he says that I came into this world to testify to the truth, and everyone on the side of truth listens to me. And Pilate says, "Well, what is truth?" Now, that in and of itself is a great question. What is truth? So what is truth? The Word of God. Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," right? So Jesus is the truth. But I don't think Pilate said it in that way. I don't think he was trying to determine, what truth was so he could believe in Jesus and follow Jesus. I think it was more of a snide remark. It was more like, what is truth? Trying to just, put Jesus off, but, just dismissive kind of thing. And I think he kind of felt like maybe this whole thing was just a waste of his time. And then he comes back and he says, "I find no basis for a charge against him." That's his verdict. Okay, remember I told you there were 6 trials. That should have been it. That's the trial. He says, "I find no basis." In other words, he's free to go. He's not guilty. But he was also afraid of the Jews and afraid of the Jewish leaders and afraid of what might happen. So he goes out and he proposes a little trade. We have this guy that's a murderer, been part of an insurrection, a rebellion, and probably not a very good person at all. And then you have Jesus over here, who's done nothing bad at all, helped a lot of people, healed a lot of people. But the Jewish leaders were jealous of him, and it was a lot of that was causing this trial to come up in the first place. So he said, "Who do you want? Do you want this murderer released, or shall I release Jesus?" And it says in one of the other Gospels that the crowd, or the Jewish leaders convinced the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to crucify Jesus. By the way, before that happened, he met with Pilate as he was in trial with Pilate. And when Pilate, probably back up here, when he was first telling him, I don't find any fault with him. At some point in that time period, he found out that he was a Galilean, or he's from Galilee. That's where he did a lot of his miracles and spent a lot of his time. And Herod, who was the tetrarch of Galilee, just happened to be in Jerusalem for the Passover celebration. So he sent him to Herod. Said, "Let Herod put him on trial." And Herod took him, and he was all excited because he had heard about all of the miracles and everything that Jesus had done, and he was wanting to be entertained. He wanted Jesus to do some miracles for him, and Jesus refused. And then Herod sent him back to Pilate, and that's when we get to this point, and Pilate said, "I don't find any fault with him." They kept on, and they said, "Crucify him." So we'll get to it in a few minutes, but Pilate basically said, "I'll have him beaten and then released." And they said, no, that's not enough. We want him killed. And so Pilate consented, and that's when he said, "You see to it yourself, I wash my hands of it." And he brought out a bowl and he washed his hands. And the Jews said, let his blood be upon us and our children. And so then the thing happened. So I want to talk about these illegal procedures. There were 6 trials. There they are. Before Annas, and then before Caiaphas, before the Sanhedrin, then Pilate, Herod, and Pilate. In that order. I'll leave that up there for a few minutes. But there were 10 procedure things that were illegal, that were part of these 6 trials. I don't have those up there, do I, Bill? Oh, do I have all 10 of those listed too? Okay. All right, go back to the thing. Any of you want to write those down? Or okay, because if you want them, I'll leave them up there. And yes, you want to write these 6 down? Okay, I'll give you time to write those down. Happens all the time at school. You put it up there and then you sit and you wait and you wait. Or you put it up there and you start talking about it and nobody listens to anything you say anyway, right? Bill, you do have this going out on the... Okay. Traffic, huh? Isn't Mustang fun? They're writing this down, so. Yeah. We were waiting for y'all. You may have to tell them online who just came in, so they'll wonder why I'm just. Yes. Yeah, I'm sorry. If I would have thought about it, I would have printed all this out for you so you wouldn't have to write everything down. So he was taken before Annas. Remember, he's the one kind of in charge. And then he went to Caiaphas. Now, Caiaphas at first interrogates him by himself. It's just him, or it could have been guards and stuff with him, but just him and Jesus. And then he goes before the whole Sanhedrin, all of them. Well, I say all of them, not all of them. I doubt if Nicodemus was there. I doubt if Joseph of Arimathea was there. There were probably several others, and we talked about that a couple of weeks, or last week or a week before, that I'm sure they made sure that only those people that believed the way they did were there. And then he went before Pilate, and then Pilate sent him to Herod, and then back to Pilate. So there were 10 things, procedures, that were illegal. The first of those is that no part of the proceeding could occur during the evening. You weren't supposed to have trials at night. It was only during the day, and that was against Jewish law to have a trial at night. And we know that he met before Annas and even Caiaphas, In fact, when he went to before Pilate, we just read that tonight, right before he went to Pilate, it says, by now it was early morning. So all of this, the rest of this happened probably between midnight and about 5 or so in the morning. The second thing, it was Jesus when he was brought before Caiaphas. Caiaphas was not supposed to interrogate anybody by himself. That was also an illegal procedure. He was not supposed to do that. He was supposed to, only, he was kind of like the judge. He was standing up there. Of course, he wasn't the jury as well, but he was the judge, and he wasn't supposed to talk to him all alone, but he did. And then in the third thing, Jesus was being accused of blasphemy, and the Sanhedrin was the one that brought those charges against him. The Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin, they're the ones that said, how's it put it here? I'm sorry, I get the wrong place here. Oh, that's not in this one. That's in Matthew. It's not in John. That's why I couldn't find it. But that was where they said he's worthy of death. But they decided, nobody else brought charges against him, just the Sanhedrin. And the Sanhedrin was not supposed to bring charges. They were just supposed to listen to it, and they were kind of the jury. Caiaphas was kind of like the judge, and the Sanhedrin would be the jury, and they couldn't bring charges. They were just supposed to listen and make judgment. And then the fourth thing, according to the Talmud, according to their Jewish law, no session, again, this has to do with the same with the first one, but no session of the court could start before the morning offering, which would have been at, I think, about 9 o'clock in the morning. And the Sanhedrin also met before that time. They met while it was still night. And then number 5, it says that the Jewish law required that no trial, no legal proceeding should take place the day before the Sabbath. And that included the special Sabbaths. There was a special Sabbath on the first day of unleavened bread, which would be the eve of Passover. Should not have any kind of trial going on that day. They should have put it off according to their own law. I don't know how you could write that real small, but a few words. No trial on the Sabbath, maybe. That's the easiest way. I didn't remember putting all of that on there. And number 6, the whole thing, from the trial to his crucifixion and everything, took less than 24 hours. And according to law, number 1, Jesus should have had a lawyer, and there is no indication that he had any kind of lawyer. No notification was made to any of his friends, like Peter, John, anybody like that, to stand up for him and give their side of things. And if he was accused on one day, he could not be condemned on that same day. They had to wait at least 24 hours before they could pass judgment on him. So all of this happened the same day, which again was against their law. He should have been brought charges against him, had a lawyer, had his friends be able to speak for him, and then if they found him guilty, they had to wait 24 hours before they crucified him, but they didn't do that. That was all done the same day. Number 7 is kind of weird, but it says that according to the Sanhedrin, their law, at least one judge had to stand, had to say that the defendant was innocent, okay? They had to stand to defend the accused. Maybe not say he was innocent, but they had to defend him. At least they had to have, it's kind of like what we have, if you can't afford an attorney, one will be appointed to you. They'll have to have somebody that knows the law that will defend him. And again, they didn't do that. And they also have the law. It says that if nobody would stand with them to defend him, then they had to let him go free. If they could not find a single one of the Sanhedrin that would stand up and defend him as his lawyer, then they had to let him go free. Again, they didn't do that. Number 8, according to the law, the accused cannot be compelled to incriminate himself. We call that pleading the fifth, right? That you cannot, how does it say it? Yeah, plead the fifth. You don't have to bring witnesses against yourself. I can't think of the word I want there. Incriminate. You cannot incriminate yourself. Right there it is. I should be able to look up there. And again, the only thing they ask him is, I command you by in the name of God to tell me, are you the Messiah, or whatever they said? And he said yes. And that was bringing condemnation against himself, or incriminating himself, and they weren't supposed to do that. Number 9, and this one I should have probably put it earlier, but anytime some charges were brought against somebody, there had to be at least 2 witnesses that both agreed. The Bible itself was very, very clear about that in Deuteronomy. I think we already talked about this once, that if you didn't find, nobody would be brought to trial on the testimony of one witness. There had to be at least 2 witnesses, and they had to agree. And all through this time period, they kept trying to find people, could not find 2 people to agree with anything. And then, as I told you a while ago, Pilate said, I find no fault in him. That should have ended it. Pilate passed his judgment. He said, I don't find any fault with him. He's innocent. There's nothing legally, nothing politically, that he should be condemned for. And when he said that, that should have been all of it. Shouldn't have gone on. But again, we know that, I guess in one way we should say, we're sure glad it went on, right? And we're glad that Jesus died for our sins. But all of those things should have ended the trial. There should not have been any reason for Jesus to be crucified. There's no political or no legal reason for Jesus to be crucified at all. So, questions, comments? All right. We're not meeting next Wednesday. Y'all remember that? It's the night before Thanksgiving. We won't meet. And so 2 weeks from now, we'll start with chapter 19. And we'll go through the crucifixion. Okay? And we'll probably take 3 or 4 weeks to get through it too. Well, let's stand and join hands, and we will sing our dismissal chorus.